Right, okay. Hello everyone, good evening. Can you hear me? Right. I'm delighted to welcome Charles Arthur, Technology Editor of The Guardian, to Fishburn Hedges this evening. Back in 1998, I was starting a new role in the world of PR, and I naively peppered the inboxes of London's finest technology journalists with IBM press releases, hoping I might get some coverage from my clients. Charles was one of them. Perhaps like me, he might have forgotten some of the fine detail of those announcements, but he was clearly sharpening his pen for his latest book, Digital Wars, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and the battle for the internet. That's because 1998 is also the year in which Charles opens the scene for the past, present and future of a digital world that encompasses nearly all of our lives. We're here tonight to hear more about that book, revealing how over the last 14 years Microsoft, Apple and Google have been fighting it out to dominate the key components of our digital society, including search, mobile music, smartphones and tablets. Few are as well qualified as Charles to chart these battles. He's been a science and technology journalist for more than 25 years, previously working at The Independent and The New Scientist. He's met all of the senior figures in the technology industry, interviewing Bill Gates and Steve Jobs on numerous occasions, and regularly speaks, writes and blogs on all things tech. And before I hand over to Charles, just a quick note on the format of this evening. Charles is going to speak for around 20 to 30 minutes probably, and then we can have a Q&A for another 20 to 30 minutes. We're also tweeting this evening, as you can see, under the hashtag Digital Wars. Charles's Twitter handle is @CharlesArthur, and ours is @Fishburn Hedges. So please join the conversation there, and also at the bar afterwards for a drink. Thank you for coming, all of you. Over to you, Charles.
Thanks very much for coming. It's finally almost summer, which is why we put you in a refrigerated room. Yes, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about the genesis of this book, which really came out of the blue, but I mean, just to sort of give you some of the background. I first started writing full-time as a journalist on a paper called Computer Weekly, back when Computer Weekly was on paper. And the editor at the time one day said to me, do you want to go along? There's a sort of a round table thing with one of these companies, some guy, some software company. Yeah, they're over here from the States, called Microsoft. Yeah, go see them, see what they're like. And there was this sort of quite scrawny guy called Bill Gates who was there. This was 1985. And, Bill Gates had, even at that time, he had a very dominating personality that actually still has. If you were talking and he wanted to talk, he would just start talking and keep on talking until you shut up. It's a sort of a technique which is called over-talking, which is actually how people who are supremely confident, supremely certain about themselves will basically express their dominance over you. Bill Gates showed it in those days, and the Microsoft that he built, which continued through to 1998, had all those sorts of qualities. I don't know how many of you were sort of in the business in sort of before 1998 or so, but Microsoft was the juggernaut then. Microsoft was the big beast in the whole jungle. And when Microsoft was thinking about getting into an area, then everyone else got out of the area, because Microsoft would either crush you, as it did with Lotus and Borland, who had Office products, or else it would buy you up, as happened with a company called Vermeer, run by a guy called Charles Ferguson, who wrote a fantastic book, which I recommend to you all, besides mine as well, if you can get hold of it, called High Stakes, No Prisoners. Charles Ferguson came to The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, and I interviewed him on the Tech Weekly podcast, and I commend that to you as well, because he's a fascinating guy, but he gave a great insight in that book into what venture capitalists can do to your company if you let them run riot, and also what Microsoft could do to you if you let that run riot in those days. So the book is, as it says, it's about Apple, Google and Microsoft and the battle for the internet. And the internet starts in the time that's described, it starts in 1998. That's the pre-mobile era. That's when everything was on the desktop and the internet was, it was young. People had only just heard of it. Hardly anyone had an internet connection. Barely any one of those had a broadband connection. Broadband was almost unheard of. If you had one, you were probably working for the military or else you were at a university. I remember myself that at New Scientist in 1995, when I was there, we actually had a New Scientist email account which we ran through the University of Stirling's email system, because that was the only way we could get onto the internet. And I actually did spend a whole afternoon trying to learn Unix from the manual page. If any of you have ever tried to learn Unix in any form, you know that the manual page is not the place to start to learn Unix. I did actually manage to figure out what a pipe was, but that was about as far as I got. It's really not a great way to experience the internet, especially not in 1995. So the idea for the book, I have to say, it's not mine. Out of the blue, one day in mid-2010, I got an email from someone at Kogan Page, who are the publishers, saying, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I sort of replied saying, I don't know, it's been an idea, but I've never really known what to write about. You know, should it be science fiction with robots, or should it be something? And they said, well, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they always seem to be sort of fighting each other. They always seem to be competing in one space or another. They're always, you know, I thought we could call it something like Battle of the Titans, or, you know, the Rivals. And I said, well, maybe, I don't know really. I'm quite busy, because, you know, it's quite busy running the Guardian's technology section. I'll sort of, you know, I'll think about it. But I couldn't really get the idea out of my head. It is such a seductive idea, because the way in which these three companies particularly have all tried to get the lead in particular areas, and the way that it's run down the years since 1998, which is when Google was incorporated with $100,000 of money that they'd been given by an angel investor. It was just an idea I couldn't get out of my head, and after a while I emailed back and said, yeah, okay, this sounds like a really interesting idea. I think I just can't resist the idea of writing about this. I'd never written a book before. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I just knew, because my wife's a novelist, that it's the sort of thing that occupies huge amounts of time. You feel like your life is ending when you're in the middle of it, and yet at the same time, when you have the finished product in your hand, it's rather pleasing. So I started thinking about, well, what did I know about Apple and Google and Microsoft? Well, you know, given that I've been writing about technology, writing about science and things for, you know, the past umpty years, I had a lot of the background. I did know where these companies had been. I'd seen Apple go through its near-death experience in 1996 when they lost $1 billion in a financial year, had to be bailed out by Microsoft with $150 million of non-voting share capital, which would now, if they hung onto it, would be worth many, many billions. And I'd also seen Google go from this little company that no one had heard of. I actually first heard of it from Jack Schofield when he was the computer editor at The Guardian. I remember I met him at a press conference one day, and we were talking about search engines, because not long before this day when I met Jack, there had been the death of Princess Diana. Now that, if you're good on dates, was 1990. Yeah, August 31st, 1997. Now the thing about that is that that's pre-Google, and so we had to work with the search engines that we had then. It was a Sunday, so being how journalists are, we'd all piled into the office on Sunday because we knew we had to do a special. So it's a Sunday everywhere around the world, and I had to find someone. Because I was the technology writer there, I had to be the person who found out about car seatbelts. Would Diana have survived if she'd been wearing her back car seatbelt? Where the hell do you find an expert about car seatbelts on a Sunday when you're sitting in an office in London? Well, you turn to the internet and you start searching. And it had been a pretty torrid time, but I did actually, in the end, manage to find an expert on, who'd written a paper about, which I was able to find, an expert on backseat car accident survival. And I was able to find his phone number as well. This is the day when you can find phone numbers on the internet. And I got the joyful task of ringing him up, basically giving him the interesting news, and putting the question to him of would she survived, and the answer was yes. So anyway, I was talking about this with Jack Schofield, and he said, "Oh, I use Google. Actually, it's really very good. You should try it." And so I did. I started using Google, and as everyone else discovered, boy, this is a really good search engine compared to all the other search engines at the time, which had got sort of portalitis. They'd stopped being search engines. They stopped just doing search, and they'd gone so that when you went to the front page, it would give you the weather. It would give you, an ad. It would give you the latest news. It would tell you what your favourite books might be. It was trying to do everything at once rather than doing what Google did, which was, interestingly, a very Apple sort of thing. It was very, very simple. Search box. Just tells you what it does. And so, Google obviously grew and grew. Microsoft at the same time, at this 1998 stage, hit a rather large obstacle called the Department of Justice. And the thing about the Department of Justice is that it decided Microsoft was in breach of the Sherman Act. The Antitrust Act, which says that if you have a monopoly in one area, that's fine, but if you use that monopoly in one area, then to build a monopoly in another area, that's illegal. They used it first against Standard Oil back in the 1920s, I think, and now it's being used in a big way against Microsoft, over the way that Windows was being used to extend the monopoly for Internet Explorer. That led to a giant antitrust case that basically broke the Microsoft culture. So the Microsoft that people saw in the 1990s, the really hard-charging, the energetic, the raging bull sort of beast, you know, the closest thing you could imagine it being like is one of the sort of merchant banks that we see today. That Microsoft pretty much got destroyed in terms of the drive that it had once had. And it became a very introspective, a much slower and more careful company, so that from the period from sort of 2000 to about 2003, it moved far more slowly than it had before. That left a gap for Google, which of course rushed up the search rankings and started making a really big impact in the whole area of search. And it also left an opening for Apple in a more interesting way. The story with Google, I think we all know that Google just got bigger and bigger. They figured out how to make money off offering search, which was to have the little AdWords links. A lot of people think that Google made its money just by the fact that it was Google, lots of people went there. That's not quite true. It's actually a key player in Google's success was first Yahoo and then was AOL. The deal that they did with AOL was one where they had to hammer out all the details of the deal, and AOL pushed a very, very hard bargain. But Google made so much money off the AOL deal where they were providing search for all of the AOL users. Remember AOL? Once upon a time, it was as big as MySpace. They made so much money off that deal that they could then start to get really big and to basically to start to consume the whole of the search space and the rest of the world, basically. So that was Google. Microsoft woke up to the possibility that actually this search business might be something worth taking note of at the end of 2002, beginning of 2003. They poured millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into developing search and developing their own search engine, their own search algorithms. They did explore the possibility of buying Google, but Google didn't want to do it. And the situation with that is basically what you see now, where Microsoft loses hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter on its Bing search engine and the online properties, while Google makes huge amounts of money, you know, that amount plus some more every quarter. So it's not quite a zero-sum game. There's certainly more money in search than is lost. But Google is really getting the lion's share of it. The interesting thing, though, that happened while Microsoft was asleep at the wheel a bit was Apple and the iPod. Steve Jobs, who had come back to Apple from his period in exile, basically thought that computers should be appliances, they should be as beautiful as possible, but he was looking around for a way to get people to buy more Macs. This is what the iPod was born out of. It wasn't really intended to be Apple launching into a whole new space. It was really, how can we get people to buy more of our Mac computers? And the iPod, as initially conceived, and actually as initially designed and sold, was a device that only connected to Macs. Although there was some software which allowed it to connect to Windows machines called Music Match, basically the idea was that it would really be something that would drive sales of Mac computers. Didn't particularly happen, but it did turn out that they'd done the right thing, in as much as they had a music player, a really good music player, which lots of people liked. And actually, very quickly, the Windows sales started to rack up to the extent that people within Apple started to say to Jobs, you know, really we should make this available on Windows as well. We should actually go to there and start making money off this. There's enough potential in this, we should do it. It took a lot of persuading. Jobs was the sort of person who was not easy to persuade, as I think the sort of stories about him tell you. He could be a real sort of hairdryer of a person akin to having arguments. But once he was persuaded, then he was completely persuaded. And once he decided that Apple should be doing this with the iPod, then he did. The thing about the iPod, though, that was completely against the thinking that had grown up in the 1990s and the early 2000s, the thing about the iPod was Apple did the whole thing. Okay, they didn't make every component, but they chose what should be in it. They decided how big it should be, they wrote the software, they had the services. And the idea that was prevalent especially at the end of the sort of 1990s, 2000 period, was that you didn't do it like that. You had horizontal segregation. Someone wrote the software, someone did the services, someone made the PC. The idea was that this was how the PC business had thrived. And it's true, it's absolutely true. That is how the PC business thrived. But if you actually break it down and look at where the money is and look at where the profit is, a lot of the revenue and a lot of the profit, the majority of the profit in the PC business lies with Microsoft. Hardly any of it lies with the manufacturers of the PCs. So, for example, Microsoft gets about $80 or so, if I'm remembering right, $80 revenue and about $50 profit per PC sold. HP, which is the biggest manufacturer of PCs and which we think would be the most profitable, gets about $40 of profit per PC that it sells. It actually makes less money than Microsoft does from the whole business. And when you look at other computer companies such as Dell, they're doing worse. And if you look further down the food chain, it gets towards being a zero-sum game. So Apple went against this whole idea that you should be able to just split everything out. Someone over here writes the software, someone over here does the services, someone here does the hardware. And they had a lot of success because the thing with the iPod was that because you had a united product, when something went wrong, the feedback was very quick. Apple could see when people were having problems with the iPod because they got the news about it. Whereas with Microsoft, which for a long time, until 2006, pursued the idea that they should write the software, other people would do the stores, which is sell the music, other people would make the hardware, the players. They couldn't see, if something went wrong with, and you tried to download a song from the store, it was very hard to know what had gone wrong. Was the fault with the song, with the store? Was it with the hardware? Was it with the firmware that the hardware manufacturer put on? Was it with Microsoft software? Was it with your PC? You didn't know where it was. And that was one of the things that fatally hurt all the digital player makers, was that they couldn't know quite where the problem was. Apple, meanwhile, was able to move on with the iPod. They were able to introduce the iPod Nano, killing off the iPod Mini overnight. They simply decided that that's what they're going to do. Microsoft never would have had the chance to force that sort of change on its partners. And it's very interesting that in 2006 and in 2005, Steve Ballmer finally said, look, we have to have one of these. We have to have one of these iPod things. And he actually dictated that Microsoft should build the Zune, what became known as the Zune. He decided that Microsoft had to be in the whole stack. They had to be making the hardware. And it's interesting if you look at what's happening now, where Microsoft is doing very much the same, where they've announced that they're going to be making a tablet called the Surface. They're doing the whole stack. They've chosen which factory is going to make it. They've chosen what sort of hardware is going to be it. They're writing the software. They're, in effect, running around the people who normally they would expect to make their tablets and everything, and saying, actually, we're going to compete with you. Rather like Google is indeed doing with the Nexus 7, where it's partnered with Asus, but it's saying to all the other tablet makers for Android devices out there, they're saying, you know, this is how you should make a tablet, this is what it should be like. They're controlling the whole stack, they've written the software, they're in control of the services, it's Google Play. And the idea that was heresy back at the beginning of the sort of the 2000s or so, has now become completely mainstream, that you should own the whole stack, you should write the software, you should do the services, you should do the hardware. And it's very intriguing to see whether, it'll be very interesting to see whether this is cyclical, whether we then move to a cycle where it all goes back and it all becomes, oh no, you write the software, you do the service, you do the hardware, or whether this is actually going to be a prevailing trend where everyone's going to be trying to do their own stack. Okay, so that's search and that's digital music. So we come to smartphones. All of Apple and Microsoft and Google could see that mobile was going to be very important. Microsoft was in there much, much earlier than anyone else. Microsoft had been working on mobile since the late 90s. They had really been thinking that, because, you know, whatever you may think of Bill Gates, this is a guy who can see a long way over the horizon. He is enormously clever. He can see where trends are going. The bizarre thing is that people think of him as sort of a bit autistic, but actually he understands wider human nature very, very well. So he could see that people were going to move towards using handsets, that you'd have pervasive mobile internet, that you'd have pervasive computing power. You know, that by this sort of time, another 5 years, you know, he's not too fussed about the detail, everyone would have a mobile phone, everyone would be connected. Same with Steve Ballmer. People write him off. They think that he's not got the sort of vision that you need to be able to do this. To be honest, I would say that Steve Ballmer's problem has more been that he's had a very large company which has had very entrenched divisions which have been at war with each other often when it comes to coming up with new ideas, of actually pushing new ideas through. It's more been that he's not been able to make them work together. And it's interesting, again, if you look at the changes he's made recently over the past couple of years in terms of the people who head up divisions, it's been much more to streamline, to have clearer lines of management, to actually let people who've got ideas get those ideas through. So mobile had been a big topic for Microsoft. They were in it from 2003 with Windows Mobile. Arguably, they got in there too early. They had Windows Mobile, which was a software stack which they worked on very closely with a lot of the handset makers, and they were offering to businesses so that people could be connected through data services, very expensive data services at the time. The trouble was that Windows Mobile became so popular that, and Microsoft was so willing to make lots of versions of it for people, that it became unwieldy. That by the time the world was really ready to go for big internet services, there was so much of Windows Mobile, it spread across such a surface that it was very hard to keep it all in step. It had actually become too big as a piece of code to keep in control. And that's really what killed Windows Mobile. It's nothing to do with whether it could do touch or not. Those sorts of things didn't help. It was actually that the code itself had just become, as a code base, totally unwieldy. Google similarly saw the possibilities of mobile. There are stories going back to 2000, 2001 of Larry Page, Sergey Brin, of people sort of coming into meeting rooms and finding Sergey Brin dissecting a mobile phone and taking it apart, putting it back together. And people said, "What are you doing with it?" He says, "Well, this thing's the future." Being sort of very vague. But again, Page and Brin, two of the smartest people you'd ever meet. They really are incredibly clever, and it's one of those interesting experiences to be in a room with either of them. Sergey Brin, I've sort of had conversations with, and he is the sort of person who, when you ask a question that's not that smart, he doesn't look at you in a way that suggests possibly he can think of better ways to be spending his time. But they could see from the early 2000s that mobile was the way things were going to go. They always expected that Google would have to shift to a mobile platform, that they'd be dealing with a bigger mobile audience than desktop audience, which is why in 2005, when Andy Rubin came along with a company that he'd founded called Android and said, would you like to work with me on doing some stuff? Larry Page said, "Yeah, we'd like to buy the company," actually. He was in no doubt about the value of having mobile on board, and Android has become one of the big success stories, really, of this century, I think, in terms of software. I think it's beyond doubt that smartphones will be pervasive given another 5 or 10 years, and that the majority of those smartphones will be running Android. It's simply, you could try to argue with it, but I think that you'd lose the argument, because the arguments for Android are so strong. It has so many features about it which are compelling, such as the fact that you can change it, you can alter it, you can skin it, you can tweak it, you can leave things in, you can add things out, add, leave, whatever. And also that it's free, which appeals enormously to handset manufacturers. To be able to have an internet-capable handset where you don't have to pay a license fee, which is unlike the Windows licensing model, that appeals hugely. Apple was slightly later to the game because they were worried a bit about the possibility of the phone models disrupting the iPod. The iPod was quickly becoming the way that they were making money, and although Steve Jobs did start the iPhone project, that actually came after the iPad project. He saw more possibility in a computer that you could carry around, which would be a tablet, than he did in a phone, because Apple didn't have any expertise in phones. Google brought it in, Microsoft sort of baked it in-house. Apple pretty much had to hire a whole team to do that. And it's actually very impressive that Apple has gone from a standing start in about 2004-05 to having the product that it has now, which is one of the leading platforms in the smartphone space. The whole fight that is going on between Apple and Google and Microsoft in the mobile space is interesting, I think. Smartphones are now outselling PCs. They've been outselling PCs since fourth quarter of 2010. So in terms of the number of PCs sold per quarter, you now get about 95, 98 million PCs, about 140, 150 million smartphones. That trend's going to continue, so you're going to see more and more people with smartphones around the world. You're going to see more and more people who've never had a PC who will have a smartphone. That will be their internet connection. And that tells you a lot about how they're going to experience the internet. If they're probably using an Android smartphone, that tells you a bit about whether Google's going to be pervasive. Though in places like China, Baidu and other search engines, and Russia, search engines there like Yandex, started to sign deals. So the whole idea that necessarily Android means a win for Google is not quite true. There is space for manoeuvre, and that's not entirely played out. I mentioned Windows Mobile, the fact that it became too bulky, that Microsoft eventually had to, in effect, abandon it and restarted, did a whole reset with Windows Phone, which some people think has not been a success. I think it's too early to tell. And a lot of people think that Nokia is doomed to failure because it hasn't sort of been knocking the doors off with Windows Phone so far. When it comes to Nokia, I'm not such a skeptic. I think that two factors work in Nokia's favour. First is that Nokia is just a survivor. It's a company that's been around for ages, and it's sort of transmuted itself many times. It used to make toilet paper, used to make rubber boots, used to be the biggest mobile phone manufacturer. I think you can cope with being the less big mobile phone manufacturer, but it's ready to make those sort of changes. The other thing I think counts in its favour is that it has Microsoft as a sugar daddy. Microsoft has deep pockets and will probably be able to find a way to stick the odd billion or so into its coffers, which would tide it over for a little while. Mobile, so that's smartphones, but mobile also encompasses tablets. Tablets are the interesting new sort of way of interacting. And Microsoft did try it again. Microsoft was there first, but didn't quite get it right. Bill Gates thought that people would want something that was a bit of a hybrid between a keyboard device and a slate. The software was just too clunky. The screens weren't reactive enough. Basically, Bill Gates' problem is that often he's just too early with his ideas. He sees the future, but he sees it's coming too soon. This is the sort of curse of a lot of visionaries, is that they're right in the long term, but wrong in the short term. So Apple had been looking at the whole idea, even when Steve Jobs was on the stage at All Things D saying, no, we don't think tablets are going to catch on because, who's going to buy them? You've got a PC already. Why would you want to have a smartphone as well? Or, sorry, a tablet as well? It just doesn't make sense. Even at that time, Apple was working on tablets and thinking about the whole possibility of doing it. Which is why when the iPad came along in 2010, having been abandoned for the iPhone and then revived once the iPhone started to take off, Apple really knew what it wanted to do with the iPad. It knew about how it wanted things to work. An interesting character to watch, by the way, within Apple is Scott Forstall, who is the head of iOS, the Apple iPhone and iPad software. He's the guy who, along with Phil Schiller, the marketing guy, persuaded Steve Jobs that of course the iPhone should have apps. Of course it should have third-party apps. Steve Jobs was against it. He thought that it would be a sort of a sure path to viruses. Forstall was also the guy who had a sort of a bake-off, if you like, a sort of a race with Tony Fadell, who was the guy who came up with the original iPod, to produce a version of the software which would run on the iPhone and the iPad. So Fadell was taking a version of the iPod software to be on the iPhone. Scott Forstall was taking a version of the Mac OS X, which is the desktop software, and squeezing it down to put it onto the iPhone. So Forstall won there, and basically he looks very much like sort of a next chief executive if Tim Cook was to go. He's done a lot of very effective things at Apple. He's a very interesting character. But anyway, tablets. So Apple comes out with the iPad. Lots of people say, oh, it's just a big iPhone. Turns out that it's sort of like a big iPhone, but sells quite well as well. And the whole tablet phenomenon is one that you find people split into two camps. There's one camp that says, tablets are rubbish. No one wants a tablet. It's only people who just want overpriced usuals. And that's people who say, tablets are the future. This is absolutely where people are going. I'm got to say, I'm very much, when I observe how people use tablets, I'm much more on the tablets are where things are going sort of group. I think that lots of people will like to use tablets because you don't have to wait for things to happen, find a surface to put them down. I mean, you just do not see people at train stations standing waiting for a train, pulling out a laptop and doing things like that. But you do see them do that with tablets. I certainly do. I see it happen all the time. Tablets have the convenience, especially with touchscreens. Now the touchscreens are getting so pervasive, so cheap, in fact. They have the advantage that you can just manipulate directly. There's no sort of, there's nothing in the way that there is with a keyboard and a mouse. So I just see tablets as being very much the direction of travel. I had an interesting discussion with a Microsoft guy a month or so ago about where, if you're talking about desktops and laptops and tablets and smartphones, where is the division? When does something stop being a smartphone and become a tablet? When does it stop being a tablet and become a laptop? Because Microsoft wants to sell Windows licenses all down to the tablet end, whereas Apple is quite happy to sell just to sell the hardware and just to sort of say that the desktop ends with the laptop. Microsoft wants the desktop, in effect, the Windows license to end with the tablet. He says, well, if you can stick a keyboard onto it, or you can use a keyboard with it, then surely it's it's still basically a computer. You're still doing computery things with it, which is interesting. This is basically Microsoft getting behind the whole mobility thing. The whole direction of travel is towards smartphones, towards devices you carry around, which are easy to carry around. I mean, the Nexus 7 is interesting. I think that the sort of ideal gadget is more like the Galaxy Note, which is a 5-inch device. I think that's really interesting, just because you don't have to take it out of your pocket necessarily. You can have it in, put a headphones with a mic on. You can take your phone calls through that. If you want to look at things, you want to look at the net, then there's a lot of possibility there. I think the Galaxy Note is underrated. I think there's lots of possibilities for devices that size. So other analysts think this as well. They think that I can't remember if it's Forrester or IDC thinks that by 2016 tablets will outsell the sort of traditional laptops and desktops, and I don't know. Those sorts of predictions are hostages to fortune. But in general, you can see, like I say, that's the direction of travel. So we're moving towards a world where we have search is pretty much worked out. Search is almost a commodity. Although you have people like Baidu, like Yandex, like Google, who are all competing for the space, of course, like Bing as well. We're moving to a world where more people will have smartphones than have PCs, where the smartphone is the pervasive way that people connect to the internet. We're moving to one where the tablet becomes a way of interacting, where the desktop PC gets left behind a bit. And even us at The Guardian, we're seeing this more and more, that we get peaks in traffic at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, which are people accessing through tablets and through smartphones. And then we get another peak in the middle of the day, which is people who are at work who are logging on through the desktop. That's basically where the internet is going. This is what the battle for the internet is all about. I go into a bit more detail than that in my book. It'll take you slightly longer than that, but that's really what I like to set out.
Thank you very much, Charles. I challenge anybody in the room to come up with a better kind of half an hour sort of summary of what's happened in technology over the last 14 years. That was absolutely brilliant, thank you. We're going to have a Q&A now. There are some roving mics. So if you have a question, put your hand up, we'll give you the mic. Say your name and where you work. See? Anyone got any questions? Sorry.
Hello, name's Andrew Japp from Digital White. Obviously Google, Apple, Microsoft are very successful. It's kind of a two-part question. Which ones had the worst mistakes? Obviously Google, Wave, Ping, we all know them, but where have companies actually fallen down? Where can the three chief execs that currently now exist, who's the bigger visionary to take the companies forward between Schmidt, Cook and
Oh, okay. So who had the biggest mistakes? I would say that in terms of fumbling the ball, Microsoft, without a doubt. Microsoft had everything. Microsoft had tablets. They had, they had the mobile space really ready to be grabbed. but they couldn't hold themselves back from just saying, yeah, no, we'll do a version of Windows Mobile for you. No, that's fine, and it just, it spread until they couldn't control the code. So that was a mistake there. They had the fights over search. So, for example, the team who were building the search engines wanted to get some cooperation from the people who were building the Windows platform at the time, and they just got rebuffed. They just got told no. Even with Bill Gates sort of egging them on, they couldn't get that backing. And there is a key moment when Microsoft could have bought, in 2003, they could have bought Overture, which is the company that came up with the idea of when you search for something, a term that's linked to that search, a paid-for term, comes up beside it. It was Overture that did that first, it wasn't Google. Google took the idea and improved on it, I think is the legal way to say it. Although they did then pay a settlement out of court to Overture just ahead of their flotation. So, similarities between the two. So yeah, Microsoft has definitely missed the ball on a number of occasions here. As to which CEO is the most visionary, Tim Cook is unknown. It's really hard to know what sort of vision he carries, because his real expertise was as the supply chain guy. But equally, would you necessarily say that Steve Jobs was a visionary? I mean, really, what he was really good at was the really minor, tiny, infinitesimal detail. So, for example, in terms of detail that Steve Jobs would be concerned about, he once rang a Google engineer on a Sunday and said, "Oh, look, yeah, listen, it's look, I'm sorry to bother you on the Sunday, but listen, we've got a team working on this already, but I just thought you should know, okay? It's about the logo." I said the logo. He said, "Yeah, on the iPhone, the logo, it's the when you have the Google, when it comes up, it was on one of the apps. The shading on the second O is wrong." And I said, "Is it? You've got a team working on it." Okay. That's the sort of detail that he would focus on. In terms of being visionary, well, that's really hard to know. Actually, I think it is quite hard to know exactly how visionary he was, because he didn't give that many sort of visionary interviews sort of while he was at Apple. Looking back on some of the things that he said, there's a really great interview that he did in 1996 with Wired, when he was talking about the web, commerce and things like that, and that's a really interesting interview. I mean, that pretty much covers up to where we are now, actually, a lot of the things he says there. He says, the web's really commercial, desktop is dead, it's all just Microsoft, nothing has changed there. But he puts forward a lot of interesting ideas in that, so that's worth hunting down. I mean,
it's just that we're all three companies seem to be on second generation leaders. And
no, Larry Page is the original CEO.
Oh, right, yeah, true. Yeah, but I was thinking more about Schmidt, the implementation sort of guy. But is it not just a bit of a lack of vision for each of the three companies? And is somebody going to usurp them coming from the outfield?
I'm not sure if CEOs should be visionary. Actually, I think that what you want chief executives to be is to be a chief executive and to execute. And to inspire the people who are in the business so that they execute. So that's why I think, for example, that Marissa Mayer being hired to Yahoo is just going to, I think every Yahoo who goes into work today is just going to be, yes. But equally, the ones who are writing code are going to be going, boy, I'm going to check that code I wrote yesterday, because you might look at my code and go, that's crap. That's the sort of level of detail that she can go to. But what you want is to have visionaries inside the company and to channel them. So Johnny Ive at Apple, I suspect he's pretty visionary in what he's able to think about, because a lot of people just see the outside and they go, oh yeah, well that's quite pretty. But actually, if you think about what the internals of these devices are like, the sort of thought and the engineering, actually the raw engineering that goes into making these things is like, there's a certain amount of what can we do, how do we make it happen? There's a lot of tension. So, other books have written about the tension between John Rubinstein, who was the head of hardware, who was above Johnny Ive, and Johnny Ive, who would have the ideas of, hey, we should do this. and who really wanted to push things. And there would be conflict between Rubenstein, who was very much sort of, no, we don't want to, that's just too hard. And Ive, who would be, no, we really can, we really must. So, for example, the original iPod, no seams. Very hard to do. And that's something which I wanted to do. He didn't want to have a battery flap. Put your finger over it, you wouldn't feel that you wouldn't see the white fascia and the aluminium back. That's really hard to do. That's the sort of visionary thing. And Jobs' expertise was in bringing that vision through and actually letting it get space. Some of the visionary things people come up with are crap. So you just have to, and so the good chief executive says, no, that's crap. So that's sort of my point really, is that actually the good chief executive is able to find the people who are the visionaries and is able to channel the whole company benefits. Madam.
I have a question. Hello, I'm not Madam or either. Hi, I'm head of innovation here at Fishburn Hedges, and I wanted to talk to you about your next book.
No.
Which I imagine will be called The Social Wars. And I wanted you to tell us what the top 3 social brands you imagine being, and what are they battling for?
Top 3 social brands. Well, pretty easily. There's Facebook, there's Twitter. It gets complicated because I've thought about this. What should be my next book? People say this all the time. There is Facebook, there is Twitter. I mean, to some extent, there's Google Plus. Google Plus is a giant unknown. It's like trying to understand how big or not big Google Plus is like someone gives you a big black sort of, something covered in black cloth, and they say, yeah, go on, here you are. And you feel it, and you go, yeah, there's something, I don't know, actually, and you can't work out if there's lots in there or if there's nothing. It's sort of, but it's in the nature of Google, it's in the way how Google Plus works, which is that some stuff just isn't public. People upload loads of pictures there, but they don't make them public. Whereas Facebook is the complete opposite. Facebook sort of blares it. Facebook sort of trains spotlight, pulls the drapes off, and trains the spotlights on everything, so you see all you can about Facebook. Other brands, well, I don't know. There's sort of lots of little things out there, and they can come and go. I mean, you've got LinkedIn as well, which is which is interesting. You have these brands which rise and fall. There's MySpace, which sort of it was fast, then it's tiny, then it's sort of coming up a bit. But I mean, those are sort of the main ones at the moment, really. Facebook, Twitter. But I mean, I think the great advantage Twitter has is that it moves at an entirely different speed from Facebook. I'm really interested by Twitter. I think it's. I mean, for me, it's a fantastic sort of resource. The way we're using here is sort of indicative of how powerful it is. We might be able to do that with Facebook, but it would sort of look a bit strange. People sort of feel that Facebook is a part of them somehow, whereas Twitter is almost disposable identity. That okay, so you have a sort of persona on Twitter, but if you got locked out, well, you go and create another one. It's a bit like that. It sort of is you and it isn't you. Whereas Facebook sort of is you very much. Google Plus very much is you. But equally, no one necessarily knows if you're there. Google designed it that way. I didn't know.
Hi, Simon Wall from Glofo. Is computing dead?
What sort of computing?
Well, every sort of computing.
Not last time I looked.
But how close did you look?
I checked my email and it wasn't there.
I mean that in a genuine sense. When I was at school, and it was a long time ago, it was a lesson that you had. And now my children don't have a lesson in it, it's in every lesson. And when I first started using computers in the early 90s, they were vast machines of satellite phones and sending pictures via FTP in the mid-90s with a camera this big, made partly by Kodak and partly by Canon. These were huge events, and now we've got powerful smartphones that, frankly, are completely outpower those things. We completely take them for granted, and we're moving to tablets, and the PC's disappearing, and it's becoming so integral that you can order your shopping on your fridge, and your fridge can order your shopping for you. And I'm just wondering whether that idea of computing is just completely dead, and actually, it's just life now. everything is computing, and I wonder really whether the digital wars will sort of be almost the...
I mean, it's the robot wars now.
Yeah, it's a very much an historical document about how computing rose and crashed, in inverted commas, and was taken over. And I like the idea that social, because actually that's starting to say it's integrated with us now. It's so much part of our lives that it's not a separate thing. That's why I rather facetiously say is computing dead, because it strikes me that that's where we're going. Yeah, I mean, are Microsoft, Apple and Google the Ford, the Hoover and the News International? Are we going to be writing them off in a few years' time?
Okay, so it's partly a question of, do we write our own programs anymore? Does anyone need to write their own programs anymore? And don't we all do things with social stuff now, so that we decide we are in control of it and we just do it ad hoc? The socialness of the software is taken for granted. Okay, so there's two ways in which that's not true. First of all, like I said, Android's going to be the majority platform for the smartphone. Android has the advantage or disadvantage that it's very open, so people can hook into it. They can, if they're so minded, write their own versions, do things to it, enhance it, hack it, recode it, make it do stuff that it wasn't intended to do. So Android has that plasticity. I mean, just generally, kids are being encouraged to write code at schools now. You have programs like Scratch, things like that, which a lot of kids find really interesting. Minecraft is actually what my kids are into at the moment. And Minecraft is a sort of building thing, which is, okay, so you say, well, they're not really writing software, but in a way they sort of are. They're doing building blocks which are pieces of software, and they're doing things with it. And the social software, now the interesting thing is that social software, so like Twitter, people think, no, you can do anything. You can't do anything on Twitter. There's so many things you cannot do on Twitter which you can do in real life. You can't in Twitter sort of walk across the street to someone you've never met before and sort of engage in a conversation about something because you notice that they're holding a cup of coffee. You might sort of say, oh, well, what I do is I'll search for drinking a cup of coffee and engage in. It's not quite the same. There are limits, even if you can't see them, to the way that the social software allows you to do things. Facebook has this reciprocation requirement that you can't be friends with someone unless they want to be friends with you. And again, that's quite how real life is. The software is a mediator between us, and even if we think that the software is out of the way, actually it's not there. It can be an invisible filter which changes how you see things. There's a really good book called The Filter Bubble by a guy called Eli Pariser, which points this out, that you don't see the way in which your experience of all these sorts of things, and the world that you see through the beginning is being altered. I'm getting the feeling that the tweets are more interesting than me.
There's like 4 hands. Which one are you going for?
On the front.
Charles, fascinating insight. Gavin Haycock, Monetize Mobile Money, former journalist, ex-AOL. Which begs the question, walled garden, fail or win, given AOL, champion of its day in the walled garden era. It feels like with Apple there's elements of walled garden as king, but it's fragmenting very quickly, and I wonder your view on walled garden, win or lose. Second question, technology brain drain between Britain and America and the rest of the world. Where the key influences in technology for the new era of the digital wars is maybe going to play out, whether you think it's going to be the BRIC nations or it's going to stay in America or beyond. And then finally, Apple and PR. My Reuters day, it felt in terms of the audience here, what are PR strategies that work in a digital space? I remember at Reuters, at Apple, they wouldn't allow you to call them spokespeople because the Apple brand was bigger. And it felt like Apple was a prison, that it was very hard to get inside. So maybe some insights into, from your experiences, strategies with tech brands that can work in the PR space.
Sorry, there's 3 questions. Which one do you want?
Okay,
so let's start with the wall garden. Wall garden, win or fail. Well, it's interesting that Microsoft, for the next version of Windows, especially the version of Windows on ARM tablets, is going for the walled garden approach. So that seems to me like they're saying, yeah, walled garden, good thing. Yes, 20 minutes? Yeah, okay. So that's Microsoft, which you had thought of as the company which allows anyone to do anything. Oh, just we'll put it out there. You write some software. No, they're saying got to come through the Microsoft Store. They have the same sort of model on the on Windows Phone. When it comes to Google, not quite a walled garden, but for Google Play, especially for the sort of media use, well, that is only stuff that's been allowed to go on there can get in there. So yeah, Google is more open in that respect. Yes, Apple is definitely a walled garden. I'm not seeing any signs of it fragmenting. What's the reference there?
Oh, my observation as a consumer is that way that it feels like there are many more products that are coming out that are taking aspects of it that I can then go to because I don't want to necessarily pay the high price, and I'll get my music discovery elsewhere rather than off the iPhones. Not the iPhone, sorry, the iPod.
Okay, well, yeah, that's sort of always been the case, isn't it? I mean, there's always been competition. Apple tries to sell itself on the ease of use aspect. That's really what it wants to do. And if people say, I don't think you're easier to use, I don't like your stuff, then it just says, fine, that's okay. Apple has always been comfortable with the idea that it won't necessarily get all of the market. What it wants to have is to get a profitable chunk of the market, as large a share and as profitable a share as it can get. That's really what it's looking for. Developers and brick nations and where will the balance about it? Well, I think the whole Silicon Roundabout thing is interesting. I think that's starting to become more of a centre of gravity for the UK, London especially. But there's always been places like Cambridge and stuff which have been a strong attractor for developers. I mean, in terms of where software development happens, well, that's been happening all over the world for a long time. It's just that it's been very easy to overlook developers in Poland or Ukraine or wherever. I mean, Skype was developed in one of the East European countries. I forget which one, but sorry,
Estonia.
Estonia, exactly. So if you ask most people where was Skype written, they go, America, Silicon Valley, was it? Just because people sort of lazily assume that. There's always been huge amounts of talent all around the world. It's just it's not necessarily coming to people's attention. So I think that like I say, there's a greater centre of gravity now in London than there was in previous years. I think that it's a great pity Autonomy was bought because I think Mike Lynch has built up an incredible company there. So I really hope that he comes out and starts doing something interesting in the British tech sector, because he's one of the very smart people that we have, and he'd be a fantastic mentor actually for lots of the companies out there. So if any of you is in touch with Mike, please remember him to me, and say I said hello and tell him to get in last gear and get out there. And the third question was PR, Apple and PR. Getting inside. Well, it's a question of knowing people there for a long time. That's really part of it. Knowing, and I have to say that a fantastic resource when you're researching a book about technology companies turns out to be LinkedIn. Lots of people will put the fact that they used to work for Apple on their LinkedIn profile, and you can contact them using Skype, and often get very interesting and useful interviews from them. So a lot of the key dates and information I needed to get, I could get through a combination of that sort of thing. But I know people in there, I know people who used to work there. As far as the PR side of it goes, it's sort of a game. Apple has the way that it wants to be represented, and I guess the news organisations have the way that they want to represent other companies. I mean, I find it interesting, just as a side note, how in the US news organisations like to name the spokesperson for something. So and so said this. When they're a spokesperson, I often think that's rather strange. Why do you need to know the name? It's not as if they came down from on high and said, "Okay, this is our policy." They were given it by an executive almost every time. In the UK, we don't have that policy at all, but that's how we are. We have some questions at the end. Ooh, Gizmodo question.
Nothing heavy, I assure you. Sam Gibbs from Gizmodo. Basically, talking about Microsoft and Windows 8, do you think that Microsoft's facing a make or break situation right now? And by that I mean, with Windows 8, it's introducing basically a revolutionary UI for it, like the Metro UI. And on the consumer side, it's quite exciting, especially for us. And with Windows Phone 8, it's about to dump the code again from Windows Phone 7 to go into it. Do you think Windows 8 will be a Vista of sorts that the consumers might buy, but business isn't going to like, and will it fall flat, or will it be something that will survive and go
on? We haven't quite seen the final code for Windows 8, but we know enough about how it will look. So I'm very intrigued. I ask myself that sort of question quite a lot. My feeling is that businesses will want a hack, or they'll want some sort of version of Windows 8 which will be like Windows 7. They'll just dump people in the desktop. You've all seen the Metro style for Windows 8? Okay, so you know what Windows Phone looks like with the big tiles. Okay, turn that on its side, blow it up as big as a desktop. That is Windows 8. So you have sort of big tiles which show you how many emails you're getting, which show you things like what the weather's like. And you can, if you hit a magic button, jump back into the Windows 7 desktop. This becomes just like the Windows you've known for years, apart from the fact there's no start button, but that aside. Actually, it's the start button's the thing, isn't it? I think a lot of businesses are actually they're going to say, yeah, we'll have a Windows 8 license, but we'll downgrade it to 7. And I suspect that's going to be, because that was what happened actually with Vista, if I remember rightly, was a lot of businesses bought it and they downgraded to XP, because they were not ready yet to move on from XP. And I think that lots of them are ready to move to Windows 7, but not 8. 8 is a big step. And I think that for consumers, lots of them are going to buy Windows 8 and go, what the hell is this thing? I mean, the experience is a bit jarring. It's a bit surprising. I think once people get used to it, it'll probably be okay. Although I do suspect that there's going to be, for naive users, there's going to be a lot of, they've hidden the start button. I know it's here somewhere. It must be a key combination. I'm going to find it. I am going to find it. I'm going to keep looking. But Windows is always a big seller. But yes, Microsoft is taking a big bet on this one. The really interesting thing is the way that they're unifying the interface between the phones and the desktop, which is, and actually the Xbox as well. Xbox interface is the same. And it's interesting how they're rolling it out piece by piece. So they're trying to get this unified feel, and I think the hope is that when people see Windows Phone, they'll say, oh, okay, it's like Windows that I have at home. I think this may be slightly optimistic, possibly give it a couple of years. They might be there, but that's my feeling, is it's going to be more of a shock for consumers who buy it slightly unknowing, and the businesses who will know ways to work around it. There's a brilliant video online, which is, whose father is it? It's someone's father, basically. He shows them the Windows 8 consumer preview, and he says, okay, Dad, I just want you to just surf to a website. And he spends 5 minutes going, I can't get through, where did it go? To be fair, he then does the same with Mac OS 10, and it takes him a while, but he does eventually get there. Windows 8 is really quite puzzling to people who've been used to Windows 7. So that's my feeling, is that it's going to be, it might be a torrid time. Don't be a customer service representative from Microsoft. Over here.
Hi there, Edward Taylor from the BBC. I was just wondering, with Facebook's struggles to monetize mobile users, do you think those challenges are exceptional to Facebook, or do you think that possibly suggests a broader structural weakness in the digital economy?
No, everyone struggles to make money from mobile. Google has its results tomorrow night, and you can be certain that it will show lower ad revenue, which will be a result of greater proportion of mobile. So, I mean, I'm not saying that the revenue is a total, but you know, the proportion of money that it gets, it's a sort of complicated process, but the sort of average revenue per click, I think, is what I'm aiming for. Will almost certainly be lower because it'll have a greater proportion of people using mobile search. Mobile search, Google struggles to monetize it, so it's not just Facebook. Everyone struggles to make money out of mobile. Really, the only people who are making good money out of mobile at the moment are Apple, Samsung, Rovio who do Angry Birds, and a few other app developers. For most people, mobile is bloody hard to make money out of. So, no, it's a structural thing, which is that the mobile screen is small. It's hard to put an ad on there and make it effective without people going, what the hell is this thing on my screen? Go away forever. You know, if you do that once, then you're really stuck.